Chapter 4. The Signs Agree. You can't trust anyone you meet on the road, not if they're a man, a cat, or a toad. If you're ever on the outside, all you can do for strangers is hide. Cranjus the Cranky. Character from the children's tale Out at Night by St. John of Westgate. Covan had been watching the conversation between Lawrence and Nildark with interest. It didn't matter to him that Lawrence wasn't going to share Guinevere's story, because he already had a good guess as to what happened. Only one major thing happened at Lunar Conjunctions that could have had this kind of fallout, and Covan could still feel something within Gwenevere, something more than poison. He was no sage, but he had always had a connection to the chill, and to all magic related to the night. The fact that he could sense something so powerful within Gwenevere further convinced him that his guess was correct. Knowing what ailed Gwenevere did not quench Covan's curiosity, but rather caused it to rise even higher. This was the first time he'd ever encountered someone like this, and it gave Covan an annoyingly strong urge to find out how the situation would end. Of course, upon the warning of unwelcome visitors, Covan's curiosity became blanketed by his responsive preparation. He swung his bow off his shoulder, only to realize he still lacked arrows. Cursing under his breath, he set it aside and picked up his glaive. The massive weapon almost brushed the ceiling of Nildark's hut. It would be of little use trying to maneuver inside. "Unwelcome visitors does not mean there'll be enemies trying to kill us," Nildark said, somewhere between amused and worried, "although I do appreciate you being ready." Covan saw Lawrence try to rise, only to fall back to the ground, eyes closed in pain. He would be of no use if there was to be a fight. Footsteps approached from outside. Covan listened carefully. More than 4 men, less than 8, depending on how skilled they were. Covan figured he could defeat them. It was, after all, a try-night. The hut door banged open, and Covan leveled his glaive at the man now standing there. "She brought a bodyguard, I see," the invader commented, and it was with surprise that Covan realized it wasn't a man, but a woman. "What do you want?" Covan growled. The woman wore white furs over a thick light blue cloak. Long, blonde hair ran out beneath her leather helmet, with a visor that covered her eyes. Covan saw 4 men behind her, wearing similar garb, but they each held a drawn sword. They stood in formation behind the woman, with swords held upright, almost ceremoniously. All of them wore similar helmets, with an insignia burned into the forefront of it, a circle, surrounded by 8 triangles, pointed outward, as if they were rays of the sun. "I'm getting rid of a great evil before it fully realizes its power," the woman said seriously. "If you choose to side with the darkness, I will not hesitate to kill you." "What?" Lawrence gasped from the corner. What in this room is evil?" His eyes returned suspiciously to Covan. "Surely you have sensed it, sage?" the woman asked, looking past Covan to Nildark. The old man sat in his chair, frowning deeply. His expression became grim as he turned to look at Gwenevere. It is not inherently evil," Nildark whispered, sounding troubled. "Great power dwells there, yet to be swayed to either side." "In my experience, great power always falls to darkness sooner or later," the woman stated simply. "Take time to tear it at the root." "Who are you?" Covan asked. The woman smiled. "Johanna, they call me. And you are?" Covan Dragonsbane," Covan growled. "Perhaps you've heard of me." The woman's smile quickly turned into a frown. "I have." A moment of silence passed between them. Covan wondered if his name was enough to frighten Johanna and her men off, but somehow he doubted it. "You mean to kill the girl?" Covan said, not lowering his glaive. "Indeed," Johanna replied. "You intend to try and stop me?" Covan considered this. He hadn't wanted to get this deeply involved, but now he knew what was ailing Gwenevere. Helping Lawrence and his sister find Nildark was one thing. Did he want to become further entangled in the situation? He himself was an outlander, deemed as evil, outcasted by society, called a child of the devil. That made him want to defend Gwenevere, if for nothing else but to defend those who others judged prematurely as evil. On top of that, the girl was a victim of circumstance, as was her brother. Hardly anyone else knew what took place upon the night of Lunar Conjunctions. There was no way Gwenevere had brought this upon herself on purpose. "Indeed," Covan told Johanna, "I intend to stop you." Faster than lightning, and without a warning, Johanna dove forward. A gleaming knife appeared seemingly from nowhere in her hand. She snaked around Covan's glaive and went straight for his throat. If Augmentus, the first moon, had not been in the sky that night, Johanna would have been faster than Covelin. As it was, Covelin had the reflexes needed to drop his glaive and grab Johanna by the wrist. She was surprisingly strong, but Covelin stopped her attack mid-swing. With a grunt, he extended his hand and released a burst of magic. The power struck Johanna in the chest and sent her staggering backward into the doorway. Covelin cocked his head at her. Johanna was faster than any normal person could be, and far stronger than her typical stature could give her credit for. The four men outside looked ready to charge, but Johanna filled the small doorway, leaving them no room to engage. That was, of course, Covelin's plan. He pressed forward, drawing his long knife from its place on its leg. Johanna darted forward, her own knife flashing in her hands. They had a swift exchange, their blades ringing between them, and then Johanna ducked beneath Covelin's blade and lunged for Gwenevere. "Cease this at once!" Nildark shouted, moving to stop Johanna, but she thrust him aside easily. The old man hit the wall and cried out in pain. Covelin spun to face her, ready to throw his knife, but one of Johanna's men came barreling through the door and grabbed him from behind, pinning his arms to his side. Covelin elbowed his assailant in the gut, sending the man stumbling backward, but it was too late. Johanna had reached the bedside. She gave no sign of hesitation as her knife drove toward Guinevere's throat. Lawrence, somehow, with a burst of panic and emotion, dove in between Johanna and Gwenevere. Johanna's knife caught Lawrence in the chest, and he bellowed in agony, but not before driving his own sword through Johanna's gut. Covelin, now free, sprang forward and put his knife to Johanna's throat. Lawrence toppled to the ground, moaning feebly, blood spilling from his chest. Johanna, with Lawrence's sword still impaled in her gut, remained on her feet. "Milady!" one of the men roared, rushing into the hut. Covelin extended his hand and gave a strong spurt of magic, sending the advancing man careening into the wall as if struck by a strong punch. Keeping his knife at Johanna's throat, Covelin growled, "I somehow think you believe you're doing the right thing, so I'm not going to kill you, but you'd better leave, Johanna. This girl is under my protection." "Not going to kill me?" Johanna breathed. "I've already got a sword through my gut. I'll be dead soon enough." "It's a tri-night," Covelin told her, "and we both know that the fourth moon is above us." "Figured it out that quickly?" Johanna asked, sounding amused despite her pain. "You didn't try very hard to hide it," Covelin replied. Grabbing her by the shoulder, Covelin turned her around, gripping the pommel. Covelin jerked the blood-stained sword from her gut and shoved her toward her men. Johanna stumbled to her knees in the doorway, hardly able to function. Two of her men came to her side and pulled her away. The other two looked ready to fight Covelin, but Johanna called after them. "Eric, Feldor, fall back," she gasped haggardly. "That's not a fight you'll win. Let us withdraw. We'll have to do our work another day." As Covelin watched Johanna stagger away with help from her men, he was certain of two things. Johanna would most certainly survive, and this would not be the last time he saw her. Once their attackers were out of sight, Covelin closed the door and turned back to the room. Nildark was kneeling beside Lawrence, whose breathing had become dangerously erratic. We need a potion of preservation," Covelin said, moving to the bookshelf, "or a circle of healing. I could draw one." "I'm afraid it's too late for that," Nildark murmured heavily. "Between the chill already and his bloodstream and this recent wound, young Lawrence's life will be impossible to save tonight." Covelin frowned. That's not what he had wanted to hear. Moving to the sage's side, he knelt as well. Lawrence reached up and gripped Covelin's wrist. "Protect her," he said, his voice barely audible. "She didn't want any of this. This isn't her fault. Ravon should have known." His voice trailed off, and Lawrence's body went limp. His eyes remained open, staring sightlessly at the ceiling. "Poor lad," Nildark whispered. "What a brave young man. It's too bad his father won't even miss him." "Poor lass," Covelin muttered, looking back to Gwenevere. "When she awakes, she'll have quite the horror to face." They sat in silence for a moment. "You can sense what's within her?" Covelin asked, glancing at Nildark. The sage nodded slowly. "I know not what it is, but there is great power within her." "Johanna wanted her dead for it," Covelin grunted. "As did, undoubtedly, whoever administered her the Veloith," Nildark said. Covelin sighed. "What do we do now?" he asked. "We take care of her," Nildark replied. Char leaned back in his chair, hardly able to contain his excitement. Star charts, calendars of the lunar cycle, and large tomes full of complex diagrams littered his desk. It was an awful mess of knowledge, all the papers piled on top of each other. Char's only company was the single candle on the corner of his desk. keeping the shadows of his windowless study at bay. The bookshelf to his left had been almost completely emptied, its contents lying all about the room. "So it has happened before," he whispered. "I knew it!" A soft knock came to the door, and Char jerked upright. He realized he had no idea how long he'd been in his study. He had lost all recollection of time. "Who goes there?" Char called. "Aspen?" a young voice replied tentatively. "Ah, yes. Come in." The door opened, and a teenage girl poked her head in. "Mr. Sycamore, sir, are you all right?" "Am I all right?" Char asked in surprise. "Whatever do you mean?" "It's been 3 days since anyone's seen you," Aspen replied. It was obvious she was worried. Her shoulder-length brunette hair lay in a tangle about her robed shoulders, and from the dark circles beneath her eyes, it looked as though she hadn't slept a lot recently. Aspen's concern made Char realize how tired he was. He shook his head, yawning loudly. 3 days? Must have lost track of the time. Aspen was looking curiously at all the papers, books and scrolls on his desk scattered about the carpeted floor around him. "Apologies, I am a bit of a mess at the moment," Char said, rubbing the back of his neck. "No, sir, that's all right," Aspen replied hastily. "I'm just curious about... Her voice trailed off as she fell into sheepish silence. Her face turned red as she looked at her feet, showing barefoot beneath her robes. "If I've found something?" Char asked helpfully. "Yes," Aspen squeaked. "We've all been wondering, sir. Oak is on his way here now. I suppose to ask you the same question. So, you have found something, then?" Char leaned his elbows on his desk and let out a long breath. "Yes, I have." Aspen waited expectantly. Char grinned at her. "For the first time since the chill arrived, a new power has entered Northost. All 9 constellations, along with the alignment of the planets, agree upon this." Aspen took in a sharp breath. "What kind of power, sir?" "One that could do serious damage to Northost," Char murmured. He sat in thoughtful silence for a moment, and then added, "Or perhaps help us all." "What do you mean?" Aspen asked. "Do you know what a lunar conjunction is, Aspen?" Char asked. Aspen nodded tentatively. "It's when all 5 moons are up at once." "Very good," Char said. "That only happens once every 20 years. "I know," Aspen replied. "What does this have to do with your research?" 12 weeks ago, Northost experienced a lunar conjunction," Char told her. "It was incredible. I was at the Silver Scroll in Castleton at the time, studying the night sky. But, Aspen, I have studied other lunar conjunctions. I saw that this one was different." He pounded his fist into the table to emphasize his next words. "Every single constellation." "What?" Aspen asked, not understanding. Every one of the 4 great constellations was up that night," Char went on excitedly, talking faster and faster. "And all of the planets aligned, and all of the moons were in the sky. Have you ever heard of something like that happening?" Aspen shook her head. "I thought the same thing," Char said. "I was thrilled. Was this the first time all of celestial signs were in the sky at the same time? I had to know, Aspen. I had to. So I spent the last 12 weeks looking for this." He pointed at a large black book lying open on his desk. "I thought I had read about this somewhere before, but I didn't find the tome until 3 days ago." Letting out a breath, he leaned back in his chair, gazing at the ceiling in satisfaction. "Hence my 72-hour sabbatical." "Did you read the whole thing?" Aspen asked, gaping at the massive tome. Char nodded, cover to cover, and it gave me the answer I needed. "Which was?" Aspen asked hesitantly, as if nervous that Char's excitement would burst from him and damage something. "It has happened before," Char exclaimed. 500 years ago, just before the chill arrived, there was a lunar conjunction accompanied by every constellation and the alignment of the planets. These celestial signs declare that something, or someone, powerful entered the world at that time. I am led to assume that this something heavily influenced or perhaps brought about the chill." Aspen shivered and shifted her feet, but remained silent, listening intently. Char went on. "This was centuries ago, of course, and nothing similar has occurred since, until 3 months ago, on the night of the most recent lunar conjunction." "The same night our sages felt something powerful occurring in Midfield," Aspen remembered. Char nodded. "Indeed," he said, "which is why I must now assume that, like 500 years ago, some new power has again come to Northost." "Is that why you sent Willow to investigate?" Aspen asked. Char nodded. "If a power as influential as whatever brought about the chill has once again entered Northost, we've got to know about it. The Grove was organized to try and protect nature." His voice drifted off as he narrowed his eyes. "What are you thinking?" Aspen asked. "It took something significantly powerful to create the chill," Char whispered. Imagine what we could do with a power like that. How much good we could do for Northost. Was he hoping too much? Char didn't know. As much as he despised Johanna, maybe she was right. All great powers seem to corrupt sooner or later. Was it too much to hope that whatever had arrived the night of the recent lunar conjunction would be here to help? Heavy boots approached from the hall. Aspen stood aside as a man entered the room. "Your study's a mess," Oak exclaimed, gawking at the state of disorganization of the room. Oak pulled his leather cloak tightly around his shoulders, lifting it disgustedly off the ground, as if the scattered scrolls would spontaneously combust. Yes, haven't found much time to clean up lately," Char muttered. "Or eat or sleep," Aspen commented, but Oak didn't hear her. "Sycamore," Oak said, his voice low but strong. He was the biggest man in the room, a good head taller than Char, with a sword slung over his shoulder. His black beard was thicker than his coat, and his hair was done into a wolf's tail that flared down his shoulders. "Yes, Oak?" Char asked, looking up at his old friend expectantly. "I assume you haven't come here just to make fun of my studying habits." "We've received word from Willow," Oak said. Char leaned forward anxiously. "Indeed? What did he find out?" "You were right to send him to Midfeld," Oak said. "We found the source of power our sages were feeling. It is coming from a woman named Gwenevere, who took on an intense amount of magical energy the night of the lunar conjunction 12 weeks ago. Apparently, somebody else found out about this as well, because someone tried to kill this woman. According to Willow, they administered Veloith to her." "No!" Char gasped. "Did she survive?" Oak nodded. "She made it to Weatherpost, where a sage named Nildark saved her life." Char leaned back in his chair, relieved. "Good," he said. "It would have been a terrible loss to lose such a power. But what happened to her? How did she receive this power?" "Willow didn't find that part out," Oak replied. "Then we shall," Char said, looking back to his books. "I'll find everything I can about lunar conjunctions, and then look into the arrival of the last great power before the chill, 500 years ago. Perhaps, if I discover how the last great power arrived, I can find out what happened to Gwenevere as well." "That could help us prepare," Oak said. "Prepare for what?" Aspen asked innocently. Oak stared down at her, noticing her for the first time. "The last time this sort of thing happened, the chill came of it," Oak told her. "This time, we'll be prepared to stop anything treacherous from taking place." "I'll get right to work then," Char said, standing up and moving to his bookshelf. "Just have to find another volume of Fathark's Lost Tomes." "Sycamore," Oak said seriously. "What?" Char asked distractedly, not looking up as he began scanning the titles of the few books still on the bookshelf. "You need to sleep first," Oak replied, "and eat something." "I'm fine, really," Char said, waving a dismissive hand. "This is too important. What can happen to people the night of lunar conjunction? What happened to this Gwenevere? I'll find out. Mark my words. I assume Willow is still investigating?" "He is," Oak said. Good, Char muttered. "Aha!" Having found the book he was looking for, he pulled it out and returned to his desk. Oak moved forward and put a hand on Char's shoulder. "My friend, the world won't end between now and tomorrow," he said. "Get yourself some sleep. Your studies will only improve with the sharpness of mind that comes with being well rested." Char frowned at that. After a long moment he sighed. He couldn't deny that his eyelids felt like lead. Fine. Perhaps a short nap." He arose from his chair and stretched. "You'll find me in my bedroom. Don't let me sleep for too long, and bring me something to eat, eh? I'm starving." Oak nodded in approval. "We'll keep you updated on Willow's progress," he said. "Where did you say they are?" Char asked as he staggered toward the door. Not only were his eyelids giving him trouble, but his legs as well. Now that he was accepting it, his whole body began registering it, just how exhausted he was. "Weatherpost," Oak replied. "They're in a town called Weatherpost." When Gwenevere opened her eyes, she lay in a comfortable bed, enveloped by thick blankets. Her veins felt like they were filled with ice, and the familiar nausea persisted in her stomach. She groaned. The taste of blood filled her mouth. Putting a hand to her head, she sat up. The motion proved to be almost too much for her, and her hands flew to her gut. Vomit threatened to rise up her throat. Blinking, letting her eyes dilate to the soft candlelight of the room, Gwenevere looked around. Fur skins adorned the walls of the small wooden room. Several candles rested upon a bedside table, and there was an oaken chest against the far wall. The room was well taken care of, with dark red carpet placed over a sturdy floor. Drapes were pulled over the window, but she could see sunlight leaking beneath them. "No," she whispered in despair. "It was already day. I'm as good as dead." The room's only door opened. and a large man entered. He wore a thick fur coat over clinking armor, and a sleek helmet covered his face. A sword hung from his side, and a bow was slung over his shoulder. Fear and bewilderment mixed within Gwenevere, gripping her blankets tightly. She swallowed hard and forced herself to speak. "Where am I?" she demanded. "Who are you? How did I come to be here?" The man considered her for a moment, and then removed his helmet. He was completely bald, with gaunt features and rough skin, but it was his eyes that caught Guinevere's attention. His eyes had no pupil or iris. They were simply white. The man stared at Gwenevere for a long moment in silence. She shifted uncomfortably. His gaze was unsettling. At length he looked away and reached a hand up to his neck. He pulled out a wooden medallion that had been hidden by his fur. Fingering it idly, he stared at the flame of one of the candles. Gwenevere gave the man a few more seconds, but when he failed to respond to her question, she spoke out of a desperate hope. "Please, I need to find a man named Nildark. My brother and I—" She paused, horror dawning upon her. "Where is Lawrence?" The man remained silent. He stared at her again, his expression strange. Guinevere's mouth ran dry. "No pupils," she murmured. "I know what that means. You're an Outlander." She shivered, looking away from him. Normally she'd be horrified, even disgusted at the presence of an Outlander. But after what happened at the Lunar Conjunction— "You are in the Black Badger Inn of Weatherpost," the man told her. So he can speak, Gwenevere thought to herself. "How did I come to be here?" she asked. "I brought you." "And who are you?" "Covelin," the man said. After a moment of strange silence, Gwenevere pleaded again. "Please, Covelin, I need your help. My father seems to think a man named Nildark can help me. According to him, Nildark is here?" The Outlander turned away and slid his medallion back beneath his fur. "You've been in Weatherpost for a while now." "What do you mean?" Gwenevere asked. "You've been unconscious for 2 days," Covelin replied. Gwenevere rocked back and forth in her bed in shock. 2 days? The Outlander opened the door and stood aside as an old man entered. He wore deep blue robes, which were a striking contrast to his red gloves and scarf. Upon seeing Gwenevere, the old man smiled warmly. "Glad to see you're awake," he said, his voice surprisingly strong despite his age. "You're Nildark?" Gwenevere whispered hopefully. The aged man nodded. "You don't mind if I sit here, do you?" he asked, taking a seat beside Gwenevere on the bed. She shook her head, unable to speak. She had so much to say. Where to start? "You look much like your mother," Nildark commented. "You knew my mother?" Gwenevere asked in surprise. "Your father and I have known each other for years, and I met your mother on multiple occasions," Nildark said. "She was a magnificent woman. Her untimely death was a tragedy, and even more so seeing as it happened when you were so young. You probably don't even remember her, do you?" He gave her an empathetic look. Gwenevere bit her lip. She tried not to think about that. She coughed, which quickly escalated into violent hacking. Putting a hand to her lips, she felt blood on her fingers. 2 days? Gwenevere murmured. "And I'm still alive? That must mean you already saved my life." Nildark gave her a tired nod. "It wasn't easy, my dear. You're lucky I know my way around herbs and have a fine stash of potions." Gwenevere exhaled in relief. "I owe you my life." But Gwenevere, I must know," Nildark said. "Why did someone poison you? Lawrence mentioned something about the last lunar conjunction. What happened?" Gwenevere cupped her hands in her lap. She glanced nervously at Covelin, standing near the door, but replied honestly. "I did something I shouldn't have," she murmured, "and I think it had greater consequences than I thought it would." She looked down, fighting back tears. "Tell it at your own pace," Nildark coaxed her gently. Gwenevere whispered haltingly, "I was engaged. I was to marry a man named Ravon. He was good to me. I loved him." Covelin stood stoically, showing no emotion. Nildark smiled at her comfortingly. Gwenevere took a deep breath. "I wasn't supposed to. Not before we were married, at least," Gwenevere began slowly. "My father told me not to, but Ravon wanted to, and I didn't see the harm." "You slept with him," Covelin said. Gwenevere jumped in surprise at the sound of his voice. Yes, I did," she admitted, looking down. "And now you are with child," Covelin went on. "How did you know?" Gwenevere asked, looking up at him, feeling a strange fear creep over her body. "I can sense something within you, girl," Covelin said. His voice was not angry, nor was it kind. It was rough and matter-of-fact. "I can feel some sort of power within you, and the only thing I can feel are creatures powered by the chill, and other Outlanders. Gwenevere bit her lip. So, you know then? I guessed it, Covan grunted. That is how Outlanders come about. Indeed? Nildark asked, raising his eyebrows. I was unaware of that. It is a little-known fact, even among the wise, Covan said. Women that conceive the night of the lunar conjunction will bear Outlanders. Gwenevere looked down. It had been so awful knowing all of this, but somehow it was even more awful to have it told to her by a stranger. How did you find out about this? Nildark asked. Gwenevere looked up at him, feeling miserable, but there was a kindness in his eyes. He was the first person besides Lawrence to react well to this knowledge. I got sick, she murmured. I wasn't sure why, but I wasn't doing very well. We began investigating what the source of my ailment might be, and my fiancé... She paused, choking on the word. Feeling tears burn in her eyes, she forced herself to continue. We began guessing that I was pregnant, and my fiancé knew about the lunar conjunction, and he knew that it was when Outlanders were conceived. He knew? Covan said, surprised. Gwenevere nodded. Who did you say he was? Covan asked. Ravon's his name, Gwenevere murmured. A nice, simple man, a kind man. She felt hot tears burn down her cheeks. When he found out our child was to be an Outlander, he... Her voice broke off. He despised you, Covan finished. Gwenevere sniffed and nodded slowly. You are to bring a demon into the world, Covan said darkly. To him, you are no longer worthy of love. Gwenevere could hardly keep herself from breaking down. He ran, she sobbed, choking on her words. He denounced me, in front of my father and all of our household, and he ran. My father had a similar reaction. He told me most women don't survive bearing an Outlander, and I would likely die. But he didn't care. He said I deserved it. He never liked me, and this was one more reason to hate me. Only Lawrence stayed by my side. Gwenevere tried to steady herself, but it was no use. This was a story she hadn't told anyone, and it was both painful and relieving to speak it all out loud. That was a few weeks ago, and then, last night, somebody poisoned my dinner with Veloith. My father, as much as he hated me, identified the poison, and he said that you, Nildark, were the only person he knew of that could save my life. He said wizards and magic could do me no good, but that you knew a lot about herbal cures and such things. He said I only had 8 hours to live at best, but he refused to give us help, or even horses. I think he wanted me to die on the outside. Gwenevere, finally accepting all of her grief, began sobbing uncontrollably. She felt the pain, like a cold knife, sink straight through her heart and down through her chest. You did nothing wrong, Nildark said tenderly. This isn't your fault. He narrowed his eyes pensively, although that the timing lined up so perfectly is a bit strange. I wonder... What? Gwenevere sniffed, looking up. Nildar frowned deeply. No matter, he replied. The important thing is that you're alive. You will need special treatment if you are to survive childbirth, Covan mentioned. I don't know the exact process, but as your father said, most women don't survive, and neither do the Outlanders. I can look into it, Nildark offered. Thank you, Gwenevere said. I suppose you may end up saving my life multiple times before this is over. You don't have me just to thank, Nildark replied. Your brother and Covan played a large part in preserving your life as well. Lawrence, Gwenevere said, smiling for the first time since waking. Where is he? Nildark's expression became strained. Gwenevere, my child, I have something I need to tell you. Gwenevere looked from Nildark to Covan. If possible, her heart sank even deeper. I'll leave you alone, Covan muttered, and he exited the room.